American society truly did learn to look at these select men in the same way that the Egyptians looked at long-dead pharaohs, illustrating these men in the same way that the Romans had depicted the gods of their legends. The Founding Fathers became both more and less than men, as they were broken down and desaturated into whatever ideals the era of the time needed them to depict. A musical premiered on Broadway which sought to illustrate the Fathers in a light which hadn't often been seen before. The opening number did not feature a beautiful dedication to our nation's glory or the brilliant minds of the Fathers before us, but a squawking mess of angry, fatigued men complaining about how unbearable the weather is. Quite different from the stoic, candid image we usually see of these men depicted in pop culture, personifying much of the Continental Congress as corrupt, and John Adams as one of the most shrewd, obnoxious men to ever have a role in our nation's history. 1776 inspired generations of children to grow up to be, essentially, Founding Father geeks. And one of those geeks, a man named Lin-Manuel Miranda, eventually would come to pen a concept album about the life of Alexander Hamilton. In the era we currently live in, of reevaluating these figures which we grew up idolizing, being spoon-fed a very idealistic, childish depiction of those events, we inevitably find ourselves coming back to these stories and questioning the depiction presented. And while we once perceived them to be subversive, realistic depictions of figures once seen as mere legends, in actuality they really serve the purpose of humanizing those same legends for the sake of maintaining them. An excuse to just not talk about certain things that the speakers would rather not bring up. When I was in high school, I was shown a film titled The Help. It declines to allow historical people of color to tell their own story, and instead assigns a white woman the task of doing so for them. Some ahistorical protagonist who holds the values of today's society without it being questioned. And Hamilton essentially holds that same trope true. Except because these characters are portrayed by actors who are not white, you don't naturally find yourself questioning this at all. In the musical, Hamilton brings up every few songs his unending desire to eventually hold a hand in ending slavery. But he then marries into the Schuyler family, historically renowned for their part in the institution of slavery. In fact, according to the book which Hamilton is based on, not only did Hamilton almost certainly aid in negotiating for the purchase of slaves on behalf of the Schuyler family and the Continental Army, but it seems that he even purchased a few just for himself and Eliza. Hamilton might have had anti-slavery sentiments during his youth, but it's clear that climbing social ladders and gaining political power came much sooner on his itinerary, to the extent that he really didn't fight against slavery when it came to those owned by him and his own family. But of course, facts like that happen to take away the punch from some of the cute little moments in this story. What would happen if someone took a time machine and brought the real Hamilton to the present to see his very own musical? Would he be overwhelmed by his story being told in such a beautiful way, his legend lasting so long? And the answer I eventually found myself coming to every single time is that he would probably say something insanely racist. Why is Hamilton so obsessed with preserving these characters and going out of its way to underplay parts in their stories that Lin-Manuel Miranda, as a founding father geek, has attached himself to Hamilton? He identifies with him. And in the same way that personal identification with Jefferson might cause you to rewrite him to be a gamer obsessed with anime, Miranda's identification with Hamilton causes the story to be crafted with him as the inevitably glamorized, unsung hero of history. But of course, as we have to remember, the Hamilton we see on stage isn't who the person actually was. So it's beautiful in the context of the Hamilton that Lin-Manuel creates and makes the story really have an impact, but it really ends up having more to say about the value of biographies than actual pages in history. And also because, as the so-called Hamilton expert, absolutely no one is going to call him out on it. For us to always look at these men as the sympathetic protagonists of every story is embedded not only in our media, but in our textbooks. It's the same type of motivation that leads our teachers to try and argue that many of the founding fathers were rather nice to their slaves, or that Thomas Jefferson had an affair with a 14-year-old that he legally owned, or that the Three-Fifths Compromise was an example of the founders of our nation coming together to make a swift decision, and not them unanimously agreeing that a slave was less than a man. Understanding the nuances of this story doesn't mean never enjoying the piece of media again. To simultaneously enjoy media, while also being critical of its more problematic aspects, for us to understand the perspectives of everyone involved in telling the story. If there was any ultimate, finite thesis statement that I want you to walk away with this with, I guess it would probably be, the SpongeBob musical is better than Hamilton in every conceivable way. I'm not a loser. I don't secretly hate myself. I'm not singing this to no one. It's not the case that no one cares. I'm not a failure. I don't not have talent. When others see me, they can't see the nobody that isn't there.